Welcome everyone to our Culture First community discussion on our reflections of Culture Amp's new State of the Manager report. So excited to geek out with you all. My name's Jessie Jacob. I'm our Senior Community Engagement Manager here with the Culture First community. So helping run our Culture First Global Chapters program, which is now up to over 100 global chapters. We have over 10,000 community members like yourself around the world. Last year alone, pretty bananas. We hosted almost an event a day at 355 events last year. Pretty wild, both in person and virtually. So um, really excited to start 2024 off with this really cool report that Culture Amp came out with. And just to geek out, I actually just read it like an hour ago. So if I'm totally honest, I'm really excited to learn from you all as we kind of have this discussion together. Whether you read the report or not, this is going to be an awesome use of your time. So a little background on myself. We're going to do like a little check-in here with our belonging badges. But I am one of my belonging badges today is grieving. I recently lost my mother over winter break. So I'm actually going to be handing off this session to Alex Process, who is our chapter lead in Chicago. I'm very grateful for her taking the lead and driving things because I'm in a bit of a brain fog at the moment. And but really looking forward to just like being here and kind of getting back into the swing of things, but a little bit of a brain fog for me. Plus, if you can hear my voice, I'm a bit under the weather. So honestly, I'm just super grateful for this community. But with that said, I'm handing it off to my dear friend Alex. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yes. And I'm sure we all collectively feel like we got you, you've always got us. So we are very happy to help and take over and have your back. Welcome everyone. Really excited to talk about this topic today. As you saw in the report, or if you didn't, I will kind of cover briefly just the key takeaways so everyone's on the same page there. And then each panel member will just kind of, talk about their specific thoughts. So we'll get into that in a little bit. Um, as far as my background, so it kind of runs the gamut of HR, change management. I see Rachel, I see you from my other world in change management on here. Love that. Rachel actually spoke for one of the other groups I'm in. So HR, change management, DEI, anything culture, engagement. I just really love designing the employee experience and designing in a very thoughtful, intentional way to increase inclusion and belonging. So it's a little bit about my particular background. I'm currently looking for my next full-time position. In the interim, been doing a bit of consulting here and there. So that's a little bit about me. And I do think just with everything, with it being a new year, let's do a little bit of a grounding exercise, maybe to kick this off. Just going to do a super simple one, and you can absolutely turn your camera off during this time if you want to. You don't have to. But essentially, I'm just going to guide us through breathing in for 4 and breathing out for 4, just a few times. And then we'll really get started. We'll dive into it. So with that, again, optional if you want to keep your camera on, off, go ahead and, plant yourself, make yourself feel, kind of rooted, grounded, and we'll go ahead and do our exercise. Close your eyes. Breathe in, 2, 3, 4. Breathe out, 2, 3, 4. Breathe in, 2, 3, 4. Breathe out, 2, 3, 4. Breathe in, 2, 3, 4. Breathe out, 2, 3, 4. All right, get a little loose. It's the end of your day. We're winding down. We just want to have a really great discussion with you all. Yes, we have that panel, but it's going to be more about hearing from you all, getting all of our thoughts together to really have a fruitful discussion. So We do have some slides just to make sure, I know most of you are pretty familiar with Culture First, but for anyone who's not, we absolutely welcome you. And we want to make sure that you know a little bit about us as well. So, Jesse, if you want to go ahead and show those slides. All right. So we're starting with the fun stuff, right? So I know that Jesse briefly mentioned belonging badges. So belonging badges are, and they're actual badges if you go to an in-person event, but they're really how we help, just foster communication, foster community. And what we love for you to do is just pick 3 of these that really resonate with you as far as identity, just, kind of really speak to you, that feel like, say something about you, that you feel comfortable sharing with everyone. So go ahead and think on that, pick 3, and then go ahead and drop them in the chat. There is that blank option. So if you feel like there's another, dimension of identity that's missed here, you can feel free to put that into the chat. Oh, I love it. Okay. Privileged, dog person, happily single. Love the happily single part. I love it. Jesse, grieving optimist traveler, absolutely. Morgan, neurodiverse, thrill seeker, Disney nerd. We've got Dottie, social introvert, bullied, progressive. So I'd imagine, a lot of, thoughts around workplace culture and how that shows up. Megan also mentioned bullied, feminist, artist. Jackie, anxious, neurodiverse, also happily single. Sarah mentioned extrovert, vegan, creative. Jen, optimist, grew up poor, highly sensitive person. Jen Arnold, pet person, parent, nature lover. Kimberly, only child, anxious, progressive. So I'm one of 4 children, and I get sometimes very jealous of only children. AJ, extrovert, dog mom, childless by choice. Tracy, introvert, gamer, pet lover. Stephanie, optimist, pet person, married traveler. Beth, privileged, feminist, progressive. Sarah, grieving. Yeah, that's, can build community as well. Spiritual, only daughter. Paula, privileged, feminist, progressive. Teresa, optimist, progressive, thrill seeker. Megan, okay, progressive, religious, extrovert. I like how that all came together. Katrina, atheist, privileged, morning person. Malika, if I didn't pronounce that right, please correct me. Introvert, not a pet person, lover of board games. Nikki, introvert, only child, wild cat mom. Okay, definitely love that. Susan, spiritual, partnered, straight, singer. Julie, privileged, grieving, spiritual. Jen, LGBTQIA+, optimist, parent. Oh yeah, today's a rough day, right? It's no day with the kids. I totally get it. Sandra, feminist, pet lover, extroverts. We got a lot of people that identify as feminists, pet lovers, extroverts. Also some introverts. Rachel, optimist, progressive, travel lover. Jalen, LGBTQIA+, multiracial, pet person. Jennifer, empath, introvert, spiritual. Whoever's on the iPad, conservative, optimist, vegetarian. We've got Stephanie with pet person, optimist, adoptive parent. Julia, introvert, anxious, only child. Carolyn, thrill seeker, caretaker, parent, introvert. Teresa, privileged, modest upbringing, anxious, optimist. Anne is a pet person, no kids, and grieving. Karen is extrovert, optimist, artist, or creative. And Alex is privileged, artist, people lover. Naomi is feminist, passionate, optimist. And we've got a few more coming in. I'll just mention mine. So I will actually say, because I'm currently going through my 6th round of IVF, I would say childless by not the choice. I have endometriosis, which impacts things. So that's definitely a part of my identity. As well as feminist, and I would definitely say privileged, right? I've been able, I've been laid off since April, but we've been okay, despite me being the breadwinner. So it's been super it's been really great to have that time. So I feel very privileged in that respect. So love everyone who shared. We know that that takes vulnerability, and we really appreciate it. And I want to make sure that I'm saying this correctly. Okay, so the first syllable is more of a U than an A. Okay, so Madolica
Can you
or
actually
Madolica.
hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, okay, okay. I'm using like new headphones and stuff. So Madulika.
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 Madulika. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, said it right?
Thanks for checking.
Perfect. Okay. We definitely want an inclusive experience, and a huge part of that is pronouncing each other's names correctly. So always feel free to interject if any of us have your name wrong. All right. I think we can move forward. What do you think, Jesse? Okay. So a little bit about what is the Culture First community. So you go to the next slide. So what we're all about, we are harnessing the power of our community to create experiences which amplify, educate, and connect culture first activists. We want to make that better world of work possible. Next slide. And the thing is, community lives in a lot of places. Community can be, around the water cooler, right? It's all about building that sense of belonging, feeling like, you are heard, and it's not about everybody agreeing. It's about everybody kind of coming together and respecting and appreciating each other. So it comes in the form of education and content. It comes in the form of sometimes in-person events, these types of virtual events. We have regional events. Anytime you hear the word camper, that actually refers to Culture Amp employees. And a lot of times they will jump into our Culture First meetups. So look out for them as well. You can go to the next slide. Okay, so our goal. So we're setting out to try and change something. The core of who we are and community lives in all these different places, and the vision is robust. So our ambition is to be the largest community, who believe a better world of work is possible. And the thing is, we want every single time we meet for everyone to walk away with at least one action. It can be very overwhelming to come together and just talk about how to make a better world of work. We want every single person to feel empowered to move from knowledge to action. And if you've ever done change management, we talk about that quite a lot, because it's one thing to have the knowledge, it's another thing to move to action. So we get really excited about that. Next slide. All right. So our 5 core principles, pretty straightforward. So I won't go too deeply into these. So foster belonging and acceptance. So it's creating environments that have that psychological safety, where diverse opinions are embraced and valued, cultivating people's wholeness and humanity. That's where we transcend the labels, right? So we talk about these kind of belonging badges, right? But it's not about kind of pushing people into those corners, but rather kind of just understanding the fullness of who they are, right? And when faced with something we don't understand, we're willing to engage with curiosity and let go of judgment. Be willing to reflect and grow. It's all about having that growth mindset, take an honest look at things that can be improved, find ways to be mirrors for one another, challenge and support one another. Have the courage to be vulnerable. And it seems like this group we won't have any issue with. You all were really fantastic being vulnerable with us. And that goes a long way. That's how we build, that authentic and trusting community. It creates those safe environments. Put learning into action. So, I mentioned, it's one thing to just talk and talk and talk, but it's all about how do we walk the talk. And it doesn't mean that you need to go back to your organization and think you're going to be able to change everything. It's one little action at a time, right? What's one little win you can have? And those will eventually lead to more and more. Connection inside, business outside. So we know that connections and business opportunities, and we hope they'll come from this community, but the goal of our events is to foster connection, learning, and action, not transactional business opportunities. So let's let this happen outside of our organized interactions. And we can go ahead and go to the next slide. Okay. So on to the discussion. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I will just mention those key takeaways and the key findings. If you go to a report, they're right at the top, but just to make sure, in case you didn't have a chance to to go to the site, make sure we're all on the same page. And then I will go ahead and just mention my initial thoughts. I'll just kind of zero in on one particular aspect of it. And then we'll call on each of the panel members. And Jesse, if you don't mind, once we get to each of the panel members, if you can take care of the timer, that would be great.
Got it, and I'll drop a link in the chat if you don't already have the report too. So if you haven't had a chance to download it or read it, I'll drop that in the chat as well. But yeah, so basically we'll get a chance to hear from some of our chapter leads, and then we'll open it up for everyone to join in on the discussion. But at least having a few time blocks for the some of our chapter leads to just share some of their initial thoughts and takeaways of the report.
All right. Okay, so let's talk about, like I said, first thing, key findings, right? So, state of the manager. As many of you know, I'm sure if you're familiar with the Culture AMP product, they have these manager effectiveness surveys. So they use that, especially to kind of drive understanding how the reports are feeling, along with other sources of data. So the key findings are, I don't think any of these are going to be a surprise to any of you, by the way, but managers are incredibly important as they inspire higher motivation and commitment among their direct reports. They are currently under stress. They are stuck in a bind between leading others and managing others. And this is a really interesting discussion. I'm actually pursuing my PhD in organizational leadership, and we talk all the time about leading versus managing. And there are some who say leading is a part of managing. And then there are some who say, no, we do need to differentiate it. So I'm looking forward to that discussion, especially because I had to write a whole 15-page paper about leading versus managing. So super curious to hear what you all say. While the managers of managers want them to focus on leadership skills like strategy, direct reports seek more support on things like growth and development. As managers rise through the ranks from frontline manager to middle manager to senior manager, they spend less time focusing on developing effective manager behaviors. So as you know, especially you read, if you read through it, there's all this focus on new manager training, but how do we make sure that we are constantly keeping those skills fresh? How are we making sure that people are able to apply their lessons learned? How are we fostering the behaviors of reflection, and using kind of what they've learned on the job to become a better manager? And how is that reinforced in the organization? And then the last key finding is there are actions that organizations can take to better support their managers, which are detailed within the report. So again, that was just to kind of ground us in. These were the key findings. So everything that follows really just kind of expands upon those different findings. So with that, I am going to go ahead and start with my own takeaways. So I'll be the first chapter lead to participate. So this is not the views of the entire Chicago chapter. This is just the views of me. But happy to kick us off after having done manager training for most of my career. So it's interesting. When I first read this, my initial thoughts, kind of where I zeroed in on, was one-to-ones and technology enablement. Because what I was thinking of, one-to-ones are not all created equal, and they talk about in the report about comprehensive one-to-ones. And while it's alluded to, I think it's really essential to call out building trust within those, and that can look different depending on the employee. Now, part of that is, in fact, through continuous feedback and focus on development. However, it's important to balance that with building connection, most especially in diverse teams. And there needs to be organizational trust for employees to feel confident in how they respond to the manager 180s in the first place, so that manager effectiveness survey. So that was one piece of it. It's really kind of how are we drilling in on those one-to-ones. The other thing that came up, it talked about career development conversations. I think it is so important to separate career development conversations from one-to-ones. That's my own personal thing. And a lot of organizations actually now have career coaches specifically. So the managers can focus on more of the day-to-day work, and the career coaches can focus more on that career development conversation. Doesn't have to be that way. For instance, with my last report, we would meet quarterly separately to talk about career conversations. I had her create her own JD of what she wants her next role to be. And we would talk about, like, okay, what are your current skills? How do we lean into your strengths? And then what are any gaps based on where you want to go? Not what, not what certain people are saying or getting feedback from this person or that person. It doesn't mean you don't deal and provide that feedback, but it's more about, let's focus on leaning into your strengths. And if there's something you really want to do and there's a skill gap there, let's focus on that. So really making sure anytime you have career conversations that they're dedicated conversations, and not forgetting about them, and making sure you don't lose sight of it, making sure that the employee is driving that career conversation, but at the same time, you're providing the connections to other people in the organization in order to be able to foster that career development. A lot of times that person doesn't necessarily want the same trajectory as their manager. So it's actually that much more important than that you're connecting them to other people. So they might actually start having those career development conversations with other folks, right? And I think when it comes to your manager, it may be more around development in order to be promoted, right? So what are the specific steps that are needed if you are looking for that more direct line up? So those were just some of my initial thoughts that came to mind. There was so much covered in this report, but I know my very esteemed colleagues will be sharing all about that. So I will stop talking now, right about at time. And we will go over to Paula, since you joined us next, if you want to jump in there.
Sure. One-on-ones was also one of my top highlights from the report. But I'll dive into a couple little highlights specifically from the report in case for those who didn't get to read it. And that was in section 5 of the report, where it's really talking about, like, what do we do? Because as Alex mentioned, a lot of the report in the start was not probably surprising to any of us. I think it's more like, now what? So in terms of that, each level up the ladder, the data showed that a manager moves. The basic and effective manager behaviors decreased over the level before them. So as people are rising up the ladder, their ability to, implement continuous feedback, quality one-on-ones, as Alex mentioned, goal setting, making development plans for the employees, as well as recognition, decreased on each level up. And that was interesting to me. I think the other thing that stood out was that those who have the most direct reports are also the least likely to be supported by their manager. So not only as these people are rising, are they depreciating their skills in terms of what a manager needs from them, they from the level above them are also not getting the support that they need. So to me, this starts to create that, like, vicious cycle of problems. And then the other thing that really stood out was that, they're just the reminder that managers are obviously direct reports themselves, meaning that individuals that are responsible for reporting them are not getting the support that they need. So I think what's nice about, once you have the information and, the now what do we do about it? These are not new concepts, getting a good quality one-on-one. And I think it's important to get a consistent language throughout whatever the company is on what ideally should be taking place during those one-on-ones. I think in HR, we tend to have a preconceived notion about what that means. And sometimes to a manager, a new manager, sometimes even a manager who's been managing for many years, they may be executing and doing something very different in the one-on-one. So as a company, and for consistency's sake, giving some prompts for the managers so that they don't need to recreate the wheel and they feel like they can go in with some different talking points for consistency, I have found to be really impactful, as well as embraced by the managers, because as the report also shows, these are highly stressed out people lacking time. So where we may have the expertise on what that looks like, they may not have the time to go and research that and learn. Little bit of a tangent, but just to pop out, like in terms of recognition of the employee, that is another thing that is such a simple fix. But again, oftentimes managers need a structure. I was talking to somebody the other day and they were like, well, we just don't have the budget for that. And I think, you know, we all hear and expect sometimes that some of these initiatives require investment or technology. And yes, if you can do that, certainly go that way. But I always like to kind of adopt the phrase necessity is the mother of invention, but I like to tweak that to innovation. And in working in lean environments and having to really think creatively when you don't have the budget on how you can execute some of these things. So recognition can be as simple as giving some set structures to give shout outs on Slack. It doesn't have to be some compensation or reward program necessarily. But I think, again, we speak this language sometimes and people are interpreting a word even as simple as recognition as being something that costs money. I don't know how much time I have left, so I don't see the timer. I could keep going. But I think I'll wrap up really quickly with, in terms of the last page, if you want to skip to that, like the where to start, there were a couple other key highlights there in that one-on-ones, obviously, as Jen mentioned, were really impactful, as were development plans. But when you couple them together, it was an exponential increase in terms of the impact. So good news is, if you can only do one thing, just pick one thing, focus on one thing to trickle out through the group of managers, even if it's a small team. If you're in a larger company, sometimes we can get daunted by how do we roll this out on a big scale. Start with one division, start with one group, start with one person. But as the report says, the only wrong action you can take is no action at all. All right, I'll pass it over to Teresa.
Thank you. That was very well done, Paula and Alex. I feel like you guys prepared a brief synopsis. Well, I'm just going to be cuffing it. I also tagged a few of the things that Paula and Alex tagged, and I sound off the cuff, but I am going to show my screen because I did highlight some stuff. I am that way. I think the thing that, and I'm going to share because I know some people didn't get a chance to read or read the report, I guess. So I think the big thing for me, can everybody see this? I can't see you, so somebody come off mute and just say yes.
Yeah, we got you.
Perfect, thank you. So I think the thing that struck me about the report in totality is that, in truth, there were some things I was really aligned with, and I, as a background, I've been in VP CHRO for 25 years. I've been in leadership in a lot of different companies, and I think there were some things that I was really in line with, and other things that I, had questions about. And I think that's okay. That's what reading articles like this is all about, and kind of educating ourselves. So this particular section, I think it's section 5, it's 4.3, in the manager feedback. What I thought was most interesting is, and not surprising, but for some reason, it's like one of those things that we know to be a fact, but for some reason, as a collective community or collective society, we just aren't making that change. That the thing that managers and their leaders, there's another page above this that goes into who is feeling this same way about this top section, this purple one, that managers feel like their time should be focused in on communication and influence and strategy. And part of that is, you're a manager, you're wanting to show that you've earned your role, you want to be strategic in your role, you keep getting pushed by executive leadership to be strategic. And part of the challenge with that is there aren't many companies that prioritize the percentage of time that needs to be put into being a manager. And I think that, we know that oftentimes managers get put into positions because of their ability to do their current job, not their ability to lead or manage. And so I think this idea that managers are focused in this one direction if you take a series of 5 points, and their direct reports are literally the counter opposite to what they need is the counter opposite to what the managers are focusing on. So I thought it was just really interesting that the direct reports seeking this sharing of information, growing with others and by others, being, that their manager should be empowering others. That is all about like, I want to learn, I want to be cultivated, I want to be mentored, I want to grow. And there's this really stark difference in that. So I thought that was, a really, I'm going to stop sharing so I can see everybody again. I just thought that was a really interesting key point. I know I'm a little over time. The other thing that I really started thinking about was the idea of, the concept of enablement has grown in the past 5 years. I came up as a L&D person, and the term enablement didn't exist, and now everybody's an enablement expert. So I'm going to say, I think one way that companies can start to really prioritize management is decide how much time you as an organization feel people who are in a direct management position should be spending their time on management, and come up with strategies to help them do that. At the very last page of the report, similarly to what Paula said, it says, we can't give managers time back, but we can give them resources. I think that the way that technology is moving, and I have a particular point of view that I'm not pushing here today, but I think there are amazing tools that can help gain time, and that time then can be used to focus on some of these things like management, where we have had, just eons and decades of a lack of focus. And with that, I'm not sure who I'm supposed to transfer to, but I think it's
Michael.
Teresa.
Over to
Oh,
Michael.
I thought there was a second Teresa. I made that up.
No, you're good.
Michael, off to you.
Teresa, can I ask you one question before my timer starts? Because you mentioned
Yes.
enablement, like everyone knows it. It hasn't made it across the pond to me, because I'm in very dark London. I'm in moony London rather than sunny London right now. So for those like me who've not really come across the word enablement, can you just explain it for me?
Sure. And I'm gonna say that one of the top leads in sales enablement, she used to work on my team many years ago when she was a training coordinator. And now she's like one of the lead sales enablement team members. She's in London. So it's over there, my friend. So what enablement is it's essentially a team similar to a training and development team, but their function goes a lot deeper. It goes much more into strategy, material development, asset development, really deeply embedded in partnering with whatever type of function it is. So if it's sales, it would be, building sales decks, strategizing sales campaigns and pitches, running training sessions, workshops. My feeling is that could be a functional role in the future. I wrote a LinkedIn post about it yesterday. So if anybody wants to follow me or connect with me, you can read it there. And it's all about how maybe we can't necessarily rely on managers to always know the right thing to do, but we can maybe create teams that can help fulfill those needs for them and help them become better managers. It's like you become a manager and you don't want to expose the ego that you don't know what the hell you're doing. And that has just perpetuated a lack of management for years and years and years and generations. So enablement is really that. It goes farther than training. It really goes into deeply embedding support teams to help people get those functions done really well.
Amazing. Cool. That's really helped me. Thank you so much. Awesome. So I guess it's my turn. So I think the thing that really stood out for me was the 2-year sort of takeoff time that it takes for leaders when you've got those growing emerging leaders is taking 2 years to get them to the top plateau, not top plateau, the top point of that performance thing. And I wonder if we were to all think about our organizations we work for, how long that support is in for our emerging managers. I'd be amazed if anyone breaks up 6-7 weeks. So to go to 104 weeks or 2 years is a real game changer in my thinking. Is actually, yes, we know they become managers and very quickly, But actually, over that 2 years, what are the phases? What are the cycles? Because there's going to be learning it. There's gonna be the actual practice of it, and then the mastery of it. And actually, when you think about those cycles, 2 years seems about right to really get your head into those skills and actually be able to influence. And it's the thing whenever I come across people that have been promoted because they were good at their job, not good at managing, lacking those skills of leadership and those management and those abilities to engage and do the things, they come because you accidentally find them. But if you shorten that runway to effectiveness, that is really exciting. So how would you take that from a 2-year peak to a 1-year peak? Because the plateau is really high. And it's interesting because it says the manager rating plateaus after 2 years. Some of those plateaus are at 90% agreement. So I don't necessarily know, a plateau is probably the right word for it, but actually that holding that top line of performance is great. And the really interesting bit is it takes about 6 years for it to drop off. So people hit a really good level of productivity. And if you've got those lifers that are your steady eddies that are really delivering for your organization, there is a point where they will start to wobble. So what do you do for them then as well? Because we all talk about the really diverse workforce, and our employees that have had longer terms of service, how do we make sure that they stay relevant? How do they stay up to speed with the digital innovations that are coming? Because actually, I know as I've gone on my journey, keeping up with the changes isn't necessarily at the forefront of my mind sometimes, because I have life that I'm now dealing with. I have an 8-year-old who wants to wrestle me every moment. So moments where I may have been sharpening something for my industry and my skill is now working out how to take down an 8-year-old and not hurt him, because he's much smaller than me. And I think that as we go on our journey, it really is that priority change and things you may have done in your free time as we go later in our journey. Those are the things that sometimes may slip off. I think, how's that? Dead on time.
Oh my gosh, landed the plane like right on time. Oh my goodness, Michael. um Thank you. I'll go and then I'll open it up to other chapter members who are here, but also just to repeat, like Alex runs our Chicago chapter. I know Paulette has said that she, like in our title there, runs our creative well-being chapter. Teresa runs our Norwalk, Connecticut chapter and our book club chapter. And Michael runs our London chapter. So if you happen to be in any of those cities, or if you are in LA, Paula is based in LA too, if you want to hang out with her IRL, but just plugging that too. Okay, I'm gonna set a timer too. I'm also gonna take the same approach that Teresa did, which is I'm gonna share my screen and then just randomly talk for 3 minutes. So can you all see me still? My screen? Okay. I also thought this was super fascinating, like the disconnect between what managers think they should focus on and what their direct reports think they should focus on, and then their managers. This to me was like, I literally was reading the report and I was like, wow, that's interesting. Like I actually said that aloud as I was reading this report. And then it kind of like brought me to like, why don't employees value strategy? Like that was a genuine question. Cause like for me, I felt like I like me personally, I was like, strategy is actually really important. Cause I'm like, where the hell are we going? Like, why does any of this matter if we don't know what the goal is or what the purpose is? So that to me was like super interesting. I also was thinking about like, what's the difference between communication and influence and sharing information? Because to me, sharing information and communication, I was like, what is that delta? Like, I feel like those are maybe the same thing, but so that my wheels were turning on like, what's the difference? Um, I also loved this little part about this little insight here about like how you get a glowing performance review despite being rated at the bottom quartile of manager effectiveness from your direct reports, and how important having a holistic picture from both managers and direct reports for your performance review as a manager. That was like, I was like, oh yeah, duh. Like it could be so easy to just be like, only your manager gives you feedback, so you're gonna get maybe a glowing review versus like all of your direct reports are like you're garbage at managing people. So I just thought that was a great little pro tip. Um, I also enjoyed this part about just like the basics of being an effective people manager around like the higher up you get into the hierarchy and the more direct reports you are, the more direct reports you have, the less likely you are to be effective with just like the basics. And the basics being here, this is what I'm reading right now, but the basics being like setting goals for yourself and for your direct reports, having development plans for yourself and your employees, having continuous feedback conversations. That to me, I was like, oh, that absolutely makes sense. And then even the number of words that you use in your performance review, I also thought that was fascinating that that data came out. Like even just the like, wow, interesting. Um, and the other thought I had was, and I'm blanking because I just looked at the time. Um, oh, going back to this part about like what's important to employees about like the number one, like, or the things being important of like sharing information and growth opportunities. This also checks out with like Culture Amp's previous research around like the reason that people leave organizations is the lack of career opportunities, and the reason that they join places is because of an opportunity of a career growth. So like this also checks out with previous Culture Amp research that I've just loved seeing. So anyway, that's my time. I will stop sharing my screen.
Jesse, I think it's
Yeah.
interesting that you bring up the point about strategy and you look at where sharing information is ranked. For you to be able to have that insight into strategy and to understand how to get to that higher level, you
Mhm.
do need that sharing of information. So it's almost like there's a dissonance there that I think is really important. And I think the other thing to keep in mind, you talked about how managers plateau and like they get less feedback as they go higher. If you follow Neural Leadership Institute at all, they do a lot around how they summarize it as power makes you stupid. So you get less and less feedback, like because when you're in the middle, when you're middle management, you get feedback from everywhere, right? You get it from your downline, you get it from your upline. You're given all the feedback all the time. As you go higher and higher, people just don't feel as comfortable giving you feedback, even if you think. Like I remember, like being VP of DEI, I was the global leader, and here I thought I was a super approachable, inclusive person. But sometimes it's just the title itself, right? Where people don't necessarily feel comfortable giving the feedback. So using enablement, right, to ensure that there's many different ways for people to provide feedback in a safe space. I think I just want to kind of touch on those particular pieces. Teresa, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I think that a few thoughts come to mind in terms of like, you asked the question, Jesse, like, what's the difference in communication and like, how does some of these terms differ? I think that there are examples where companies are doing it really well. There aren't many examples, as many as I think we all wish there were, but some companies really take the idea of communication, not just from a direct manager or a direct leader, but organizationally, the leadership and focus on transparency is really important. I know in my background, I worked for 15 years for a division of News Corp. We had a cadence of every Monday our executive team met. They then had brought those learnings to a director level management meeting that had about 70 people in it. That was another hour. Then every manager, if you had direct reports, and this goes to the kind of structure that was, I mean, this took a lot of investment to then say, okay, everybody who has a team has to meet with their team weekly. Everybody who has a direct report has to meet one-on-one with their direct reports weekly. And so that was one of my questions in the report was first of all, I love the term fortnightly. Like who uses that term besides maybe Mike?
Aussies do.
Aussies and the British. But I love it and we need to bring it back. we need to bring it here, but like the idea of meeting weekly wasn't mentioned. So I'm curious about that. I've always had weekly meetings, but the most important thing that we did as a company was we sent out the notes from that director level management meeting to every employee. Every employee knew who was leaving the company. Employee knew when we had open jobs. Everybody knew what the success and sales of the company were. And I think that was the first job where I really felt, as I came in as a training specialist, so that I was 26 years old, that was, who cares, 20 something years ago. But the idea that we had a cadence for 15 years of transparency, that's real transparency. That's a management team saying, or a leadership team, executive saying, we need you to spend time with your direct reports and your team members, and growing everybody up under that expectation. So sorry, I don't mean to drone on, but. And I think sorry, I'm going to drone on. The other thing I think that I struggled with in the report when I said I wasn't aligned with everything is like, it's not that I don't think it should be better, but I think that, it's like the analogy of my dad saying, when I had to go to school and I was a kid, I had to walk uphill both ways in the snow of 12 feet. And I thought when I was 20 years old, like, what bullshit. You of course didn't need to do that. Now I'm like, God, I also have to walk uphill both ways. And when I was a young HR leader, I had to do all these manual things. And now these like young whippersnappers coming up in HR are going to be able to do things so much faster. Like, there is a tendency, I think, also for, as you get to more senior level, you've got more, a lot of times you're managing departments. So the expectation that there would be the same level of attention is a little bit of a misnomer. I think there are some expectations that as you get to that higher level, you are better at self-management. But I don't also know that since management training is such a maybe devalued or undervalued tool, it doesn't happen a lot. Okay, that's all I'm going to say.
Ooh, love that. All right. Well, I also want to hand it off to, so we obviously, a handful of our chapter leads came with very specific things they were wanting to share. I know we have some other chapter leads too, if like Jen or Christy or Kayla, if you wanted to take a couple minutes, and then I wanted to just open it up to the rest of the community here. Wanted to definitely hear from everyone else. So. All right. Great. Well, please, anyone else want to share their thoughts or yes and to some things we've already shared? Okay, yeah, Jen, what's up?
Yeah, I was just looking at my notes. I read it right before here we got here, so I was pretty proud of myself. Yay. I think a lot of what everyone else shared, especially with the prioritization between the manager and then what their directs want, that was one that stood out. But showing that the first 2 years of people getting into a manager role, the growth was really high for 2 years, and then it plateaued. And after 10 years of tenure, they found declines in innovation, helping the directs go through innovative ideas, communicating that motivating vision, that piece, like saying what kind of what is the company striving for, what is the team striving for, and then coaching, asking direct reports about problems as opposed to just giving advice. So the coaching piece, and so giving, not having all the leadership development focus on the first 2 years may be something to consider. But then people are more stuck in their ways. They've done enough of it. They're at least at kind of status quo. So they may not feel as inclined to take people up on leadership development. But there was a lot. This was a great report, but that was one other thing that stood out to me.
I love that too, of just the like, we got this, and this is how someone's already going to respond in leadership. And like, it totally creates a closed-minded environment at that point.
Well, it's almost like if the company doesn't have that continuous growth mindset, that we can always be better leaders, we can always be, better at what we do, it's going to be much harder to engage those managers that are more tenured. But, yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Jen.
Kimberly, anything to add? And so many good insights already, but wanted to just share another resource that Culture Amp has so many good ones. There's another one, and I don't know, Jesse, you're always good at having things at your fingertips, but around 7 charts. You familiar with that? And it just ties in a lot. And so I know a lot of folks were coming here like, ooh, let's have some good data and so on. But there's a chart by Culture Amp about what high performing managers do differently. And so I just thought it tied in nicely in looking at this manager report. And I'll just rattle off a couple. I'm not sure if I can pull that up or not, but here's like 5 things that they found high performing managers do differently. They are 3 times more likely to provide continuous feedback, 3 times more likely to have completed a development plan, 2.6 times more likely to have direct reports that are logging goals, 2.6 times more likely to have shared their direct reports performance review with them, and last, 2.3 times more likely to have regular one-on-ones. So of course we talked about one-on-ones, but anyway, I just thought that's a nice little short list right there around the things that managers do. And in addition to one-on-ones, there were some other ones that are just, again, not like rocket science, but it's like, oh, you want a short list? Like if you're doing these things, you'll be 2 to 3 times, more high performing.
I love that. Thanks, Christy. All right, I know Kimberly had her hand up and Pian had her hand up too. So definitely want to hear from you all.
Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for sharing that in the chat too. I'm definitely going to save that 7 charts. I just had 2 things to share. One is just this study, when I first heard about it during the Global First conference in the fall, it just blew me away because it's one of those things where, like, when you're trying to figure out how to improve employee engagement, it's easy to want to go with the complicated stuff, right? It's like, oh, we'll doctor up this like super cool initiative and we'll spend $1 gazillion and everything. I mean, yes, I know the Culture Amp tool could actually help with the structure on this, but this kind of reminded me of like the toothbrushing study. You know what I mean? Like it's like that incredibly simple thing where you're like, oh, like you want to have beautiful, like healthy teeth, it's like, don't forget, you actually have to like brush your teeth and floss and everything, and it's like, it's so simple and yet it's so powerful because, once you hear it, you're like, yes. So I just, I really love the tiny habits exactly. And the one thing that I mentioned in the chat, and I just wanted to highlight, because I'm not sure if there's other campers here, is I think it'd be really awesome to either do like a follow-up study in higher ed with this, or maybe even just take the data itself and do like a segment sort of sub-report for higher ed, because I think these exact things happen. I came from universities, and I think the same thing happens, even worse, right? Because professors, they train in like microbiology or whatever, and then all of a sudden they're like the main teachers and advisors responsible for these young lives, and then the next thing they know, they're a department chair, and then they're a dean, and then they're a provost, and they're like, they have no, like they're very smart people, but I think that there's often a lot. I read actually in a different study recently that improving faculty development is one of the biggest things you can do to impact the student experience, and so I think there's a real opportunity to frame, Culture Amp's work in like, hey, you want to improve the faculty development, like start doing one-on-ones, like start having goals, so anyway, if you guys do that, please let me know, because I'd love to see it and share it, and hope to see the impact of it.
Thanks, Kimberly. All right, Pian. Good to see you again.
Good to see you again too. Thanks, Jesse, for organizing this. Hi, everyone. My name is Pian. I'm the founder of a startup called Emotions, and AI coaching and upskilling startup. I found the report really interesting that the managers kind of are stuck in the middle. They have different expectations from their team versus their upper management. I mean, their bosses want them to be more strategic versus their team still want them to provide more support, which is consistent from kind of the data we have seen from our users, like what are the things that they struggle with the most, both managing up, but also kind of being burnt out and finding ways to support their teams. I'm curious, I mean, there are some managers that like have like too many direct reports, and some of them revert to having maybe bi-weekly one-on-one. So I'm curious to hear from everyone, what are the strategies or things you have seen that's effective? We have also hear from some like learning and development leaders that without AI tool, I mean, one way is to develop the managers, but also people's like, can we just provide AI tool for the employees so that the employees can go to the AI tool to get support instead of always going to the managers, so that our managers can be less overwhelmed and having all of this. So yeah, I think it's a very insightful report overall. Thank you.
Thanks so much for sharing. Thanks for being here. Good to see you again.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, Teresa.
I put it in the chat, but I was really curious. So we're talking about this like 2-year space of like kind of upward mobility, but like the ratings start at like, of all the skill sets that they're evaluating, the ratings start at like between 80, like the first one is at 80, and then it goes to like 83% are doing well at this, then 90, then like 92, 94. Like, I actually think if I had a manager that start like a brand new manager, never managed, and I thought they were between 80 to 90% doing really like to 100% doing really well as a manager, I would feel really good about that. I'm curious, am I the only one that feels that way?
Well, I think
do
if you
I
think
have
about
low
net promoter
standards?
score, right? Like promoters are like 9 and 10, whereas 7, 8 is passive. So I think that's kind of the standard we're holding it up against. I feel you though. And a lot of it has to do with kind of how we're ingrained to think about like grades and percentage, and when people are filling it out. For instance, I look at Michael in London, right? The way grades are done in the UK is very different than how they're done in the US. So the way we perceive kind of rating scales can also be different. I don't think it was any, it wasn't any surprise that our managers in London got the lowest scores. I don't think it was because they were worse managers. I think it was because, as far as how people rate, they have a bit of a different cultural perception. So just throwing that out there. Michael, you had your hand up.
Was this, I just want to respond if that's okay, Michael. Was this, and I didn't notice it if it was this a net promoter score? Was this an ENPS score? Because
No,
that's
it
different.
wasn't.
I think an ENPS is, I
It
totally
wasn't,
get that.
but I'm just thinking as far as the frame of reference.
So then, but then the challenge with that is like, if we're saying like, if I'm an executive, if I'm a CEO and somebody comes to me, my point is, I think the scale is wrong. Meaning, if I'm a CEO and somebody comes to me and says, geez, your brand new managers are rating between this and this, I don't think I need to do anything. I mean, an 80% great manager, fuck, pardon my language. Yes, that's great. Like, I'm pretty okay with that, because then they're just going up and up. I think the reality is you've got the rater and the rating scale. To your point on rating scale, Alex, I think is where it might be, I would say of the probably 50 people I've directly managed in my career, most of them start at probably like 40%. And I'm actually okay with that too, because they're brand new managers. Just a thought. Sorry.
Michael, did you still want to chime in?
Yeah, no, I was just wondering whether that actually those high results are symptomatic of people being culture amp customers to a certain degree as well, and actually people caring about culture and actually have done some of the work. And if you were to flip it sideways and then look at people who are in year 0 of their culture amp journey, how those ratings would go against someone who's maybe in year 3 or 4. So actually just take it with a bit of turn the numbers sideways and have a look and to see how that would affect it. Because you take the average speed of the 100 meters final, you're on not just under 10 seconds. So you'd be, oh man, everyone can run 100 meters in 10 seconds. That's not symptomatic of everyone. If everyone here, if we were to have a 100 meters race, I'm going to hazard a guess, please don't hate me people, that we're not going to get close to that 10-second average. So, and I think culture amp's a high benchmark of people really caring about people. So that we're going to expect good things. So it's great to be part of, and it's great to see it.
I was going to chime with the same thing, just to like take it back to the perspective is that, this is still a very culture focused group of companies that is being evaluated. So, there are many of us that in one way, shape, or form may even be working with companies where the data would be far more extreme than what we're seeing on this report, because one would assume that if the company is engaged in the culture and product, that they already have a focus on this. It doesn't mean that they can be focused on it and actually doing the actions behind what they need to do to make it it like enabled in the culture. But I would imagine that those of us in companies that aren't nearly as focused or measuring this data as it is would find that it's even more extreme than some of the data that we're seeing in the report. So there's a lot of work for us to do, no shortage of work for us to do, an impact to make.
So this has been a really amazing discussion, and we do want to make sure that we give enough time for everyone to feel like they can walk away with at least one action to take away from this. Jesse, do you want to just kind of share that slide really quickly? Not that the slide really really makes a lot of difference, but so with that, if everyone just kind of wants to start sharing the chat, or we can even just shift the discussion. I don't know, if Jesse, if you wanted to take it that route as well, to talk about like, what's your key takeaway from this? Just one, right? Just one big key takeaway and one action you're going to take to improve engagement or culture based on these results as it relates to managers. So, we talked about a lot of different things, right? We talked about one-on-ones. We talked about enablement. We talked about, that plateau period, about strategy, about sharing information. There's so many different routes we can take. And part of it too is going to depend on your role. So thinking about within the scope of what you can control, that's, I have to remind myself every day to only try to control what I can control. What action can you take going forward? Okay, Katrina, the opportunity to reskill, refresh, revise skills for more experienced or tenured managers. Katrina, I would love, if you don't mind coming off mute, just tell us a little bit about your role and how you might be able to do that.
So, senior OD manager at Becca in New Zealand. So I found this study particularly relevant because we're doing a lot of work at the moment around what we call our people absolutes, which is the three things that we think need to happen in order to create a great people experience. So clear shared expectations, regular real conversations, and frequent useful feedback. And what I found particularly interesting about the study is that I do think there is a genuine enthusiasm and desire for our new managers to really take on board those people absolutes and really drive and create a great people experience. So I do think that as people become more tenured and experienced, not only are they having, a less desired experience as an employee themselves from their own manager, but I think there is a potentially level of complacency that happens unintentionally. So I do think it was particularly interesting, those stats around seeing that drop off around tenure. So we do often focus a lot of skills and development for new managers and new leaders. So I think there is an opportunity there.
All right, so let's look at some more of these in the chat here. Rachel, encourage leaders to do just one thing and make that a habit. So we talked about the habit. Trina mentioned some great ideas that her company is doing to really embed into the culture. Susan, build some of this information into leadership development programs. Absolutely. So Kimberly, I love that your brain is going with the higher ed stuff. And I mentioned the chat, I'm actually a professor as well. So like, I knew exactly what you meant. I literally was like, I was given a syllabus and that was the extent of it. Like, I'm not kidding. like I literally was given a syllabus and told, here's the things you're teaching. So that's all too real. And if I told you what adjunct professors get paid, you would never want to be a professor a day in your life for sure. So I love that. Let's see what else we've got here. Megan's a new HR business partner, did a new manager cohort, and now feel inspired to make sure all managers have access to smaller cohorts. Megan, I'd love to hear a little bit more about your experience transitioning to HR business partner and your experience coaching the managers in that role.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. I was in executive leadership at a medium-sized nonprofit for 5 years and just realized that what I really cared about was people. And so I got the opportunity to become an HR business partner. And one of the first projects I took on was a cohort for new managers. And it went really swimmingly. But as I started to look through the data today, I kept thinking about all the skills we didn't get to. And then as I'm reading this report and hearing you all talk, thinking, these aren't just relevant for new managers. We need this at every level so that folks don't forget to host a really strong one-on-one or set really strong goals. I'm also right now auditing every single 2024 goal at our company and getting a lot of pushback. Do I have to take this feedback? And it's like, well, you don't have to, but if you don't know how to tell your employee at performance time if they met their goal, you're going to be in a pickle. And then they're not going to be able to get a performance bonus. So like I'm having a lot of those conversations with more senior managers who I think don't want to do like what they consider more of like the monotonous tasks. And so I think the challenge in front of me is to reawaken them to like the strategy behind the, more like what they might think are foundational management tasks that they've mastered, and just bring them along the journey to kind of remaster them and reawaken them to that. So that's what I'm hoping to do this year.
Fantastic. Okay, so we've got Dottie is doing leadership development workshops, going to incorporate this information. So that's fantastic. Jackie, you're an employee engagement specialist. What do you think is kind of the first thing that you might do to incorporate this information? Are you able to come off mute, Jackie? Oh no, she's got no mic. Okay, sorry. Sorry about that. Well, thank you for participating. And yes, and performance reviews are a whole different topic. Okay, so I'm just trying to see if there's anything else. Has everyone
Alex,
had a chance?
I had one other thing I was thinking about. It was just like taking him. This is like random stream of consciousness. So mind you, I have massive brain fog. But I was just thinking about like how we are these like we promote people because they're like, you're doing a great job and become a manager, and you're like, I want to work the ranks and like grow up in the hierarchy and I'll get paid more and I'll grow in my career, and like those are we all want like to develop and to grow. And then when you get to that like middle manager, like I just love that this report highlights like how broken our systems are, and that we're like trying to appease our managers as middle managers, because you're like, I just want to keep growing and developing, and then the people below you are like, yeah, that's what I want too. And then you're like, well, I'm just like trying to look out for myself here. And like just that point about doing like a holistic review is so important. And I was just like, wow, how messed up is it that we don't do that, And yeah, we're so quick to just and also just the like, I appreciated the bias that was called out of just like, who are these managers that Culture Amp decided to highlight? And I think that that is like super telling and super important, even though we've made this like massive push in our industry for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and yet we're like still really far behind when it comes to who we promote and how we fairly and equitably do that. But it's just cool to be able to have this research to like shed light on all of that and how it's not super fair and it's not super equitable, even when we're really trying.
Yeah, so much of it is those unconscious behaviors. I would sit in 9-box conversations with leaders to just call out like, okay, is that person getting, kind of more attention than another person? Is it really that they're performing better, or are they getting more attention? Because, and it could be because they're on, this particular project versus this one, but that's where inequity often shows up. It's less those conscious behaviors and more about, people using that similar to me bias, where they're just gravitating to people who are like them and giving them more attention, more kind of casual mentorship, and getting more conversations around how do you get to that next level. So I think that's
Is
a
this
really great
person
tie-in there.
Yeah, like, is this person actually doing the work, or do they just happen to be in the office every day and we see them?
Right.
Like, that's a very real one too, I think.
Yeah. Nick Laws, you had mentioned dig underneath and push a little bit harder on the resistance. Do you want to talk a little bit about the resistance that you're getting?
Yes, hi, everyone. Nicole from Newcastle, New South Wales. I am working for our local council. So government's my first government role. And I don't see a lot of evidence of one-on-ones in our organisation, which kind of surprised me and disappointed me. So I started to sort of say, well, how about we give people some guidelines and some, how to do this well, and maybe some recommendations on doing it a little bit more frequently. And I just got a big fat no. So I'm just trying to dig into that, because it's just so counterintuitive to me that leaders would not want to speak to their teams. So I'm going to dig under that a little bit more. I kind of, when I first joined, sort of went, okay, strange. I'll park that one at the moment, and maybe that's a fight for another day. But I think this conversation's really made me think, well, actually, I think today might be the day. So I think I'm going to try and understand that and unpack that a little bit more. I think part of it comes back to, someone mentioned it earlier, and I can't remember who it was, around this idea of we hire or we promote people because they're great subject matter experts and they're great at their jobs, and that seems to be particularly important in our organisation. But also, two, we don't actually then, when we promote them, tell them that actually this is part of your role, and you need to dedicate a good chunk of your time to that. So, if I had to hypothesize, I think that's probably somewhere at the heart of it. But yeah, that's kind of where I was at. But yeah, it just blew my mind. I couldn't believe that. Yeah, that people wouldn't want to speak to their direct reports on a regular basis and talk and grow and all those sorts of things.
I
Thanks,
mentioned
Alex,
it
for the
in the
opportunity.
chat, but that's like across countries. Like that's government industry, no matter what country you're in. Because my sister is going through the exact same thing. So just wild to hear that.
Okay, so yeah, maybe there's something in the government sort of realm. I don't know what that is, but I'll dig a little deeper and report back if you'd like.
Yes, Nick, thank you for sharing that. And also, just like this is why I love this community so much, is because, like, exactly what you're experiencing, we experience that all the time with just different use cases that we're
Yeah.
trying to even get people to do. I think people are even still trying to convince that it's important to do an annual survey, And
Yeah,
so
true.
we're all this is why I love this community, is like, don't go it alone. Like, we're
Yeah.
here. How can we be your thought partner on all of that? So, but thank you.
Fantastic. No, I just do that lovely that cartoon double take. Say what now?
Yeah.
I was
I
just
think
I was just
I'm
going to
sorry, go
tack
ahead,
on to
Nicole.
Nick in regards to that. I mean, I'm not familiar with working in government situations, but I will say that oftentimes I find when people are resisting, that it's because they don't know how to have the conversations. And they're afraid to admit that because of whatever position of power that they're in. So I'm all for doing your digging and, get to the heart of the why behind that and then find out how you can support. It could be as simple as that. It may be not as simple as that, but just a thought to throw out there.
Thanks, Paula. Appreciate it.
Tacking on to that point, it might also, I've gone into corporate environments where the idea of a one-on-one is completely brand new. And I think that what a lot of times the dynamic between manager employee is very tactical and very task oriented. So they feel like if they're communicating about a task, they're like connecting. And that's very different than a cadence of a one-on-one. So I think they might be thinking they're doing it or doing some kind of it, but not with the intention of growth or development.
In some cases, absolutely, Teresa. I think in some cases they're just actually not doing it. Yeah. Why would I speak to my people? Come on.
That's like the best management job ever. You get paid for it and you don't actually have to do it. What,
Yeah.
where do you work again? You're where? No, I'm just kidding. I love you.
I love it. Anyone else want to share some of the other things they plan to put into action or things that they were inspired by based on our discussion? I love it. People gotta, all right. Well, let's do like a word checkout into the chat box. How does that sound, Alex? Is that a good way to tune? Okay, great.
That sounds wonderful.
Before we do that, just like a few housekeeping things. The global chapter is hosting a session on February 27th. So stay tuned for that. Also, the Culture First community was nominated for a CMX award. If you don't know what that is, that's okay. It's basically like the Grammy Awards for community managers. And so the Culture First community has been nominated and we're in the finalists. So we'll know on January 30th about all that. So anyway, just really excited about that. Wanted to just share with you all like how cool this is and that we're all a part of this really cool movement together. And okay, so let's do a one word checkout. So don't put your one word in yet. Don't press enter, but type in your one word to just describe how you're doing right now. It doesn't need to be even just describe how you're doing. It could be just one word that resonating for you right now. And when you have that one word in the chat, give me a thumbs up, and then we're gonna do what's called a chat bomb checkout. So when you have your one word in the chat, give me a thumbs up. Okay. And on the count of 3, we're all going to press enter. 1, 2, 3, enter. Yeah. So good. Longing, full, guided, energized, continued curiosity, energized, grateful, motivated, growth mindset, uplifted, inspired. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you all for being here. Alex, anything else you wanted to say or close out?
No, I think the biggest thing is, first of all, thank you. Yeah, thank you to the panelists.
Yes,
Thank you to all these very engaged participants. That was amazing. You all made this so much easier for all of us. I don't know if you've ever, well, we have a lot of like L&D people here, right? You like go to facilitate a workshop and you're just looking at just, paint dry because nobody wants to engage. So thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And also we want to hear from you, right? So you're going to get an email after this. In the survey, it's kind of not very obvious that you're clicking to a survey, but you'll see at the bottom, I think it's something like, we can't wait to hear from you or something. But that's a survey to give us your feedback. And we definitely want to hear your feedback so we can better understand if there's anything we need to tweak, different topics that you're interested in. I think that's the other thing. And of course, check out all of our chapters. We've got some great representation here. We're always trying to do cool things and we would love your help.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. Yeah. And Kimberly also put, if you aren't in our People Geek Slack community, definitely would recommend getting in there and keeping the conversation going if a digital forum is more your jam too. So, all right, I'm going to lead us in a clap out then. Very culture first close. Does that sound good, Alex? Will you be the countdown? Okay. So I'm going to ask you all to come off of mute. And what's going to happen is that Alex is going to count us to 3. And then when she says 1, 2, 3, we're all going to clap. And then the Zoom meeting's just going to shut off. Okay. All right, Alex, count us down or count us up.
Up, down. Okay. We'll go down. Okay.
Okay.
3, 2, 1.